I still remember the night I met her. Well, technically met is a loose word, because she wasn't a stranger exactly. She was the new neighbor, the one with the fairy lights in the window and a cat that watched the street like it was the evening news. It had been one of those weeks where everything felt heavy. You know the kind, where your alarm clock sounds angry, your coffee tastes like disappointment, and even your favorite songs on the radio seem to be playing in a minor key. I'd been living in that duplex on Maple Street in Burlington for 2 years, but it might as well have been 2 decades for how invisible I'd become to everyone around me. The previous neighbors had been nice enough, but we'd perfected the art of the polite nod, the quick wave from behind car windows, the careful dance of avoiding real conversation. That October evening started like any other. I was trudging home from Morrison's grocery at 8:30, later than usual because I'd stayed late at the office again, trying to prove something to someone who probably didn't even notice. My boss, Richardson, had walked past my cubicle at 7 without so much as a glance, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall, even though I was the only one still there, still typing, still pretending that extra hours meant extra value. The fluorescent lights in the store had given me a headache, made worse by the generic pop music they piped in. The same 5 songs on loop, optimistic lyrics mocking my mood. I'd grabbed whatever looked easiest from the shelves, not even checking prices or expiration dates, pre-made sandwiches that looked like they'd been assembled by someone as tired as I was, instant soup with labels promising home-style flavor that we all knew was a lie, the kind of groceries that whispered "table for one" a little too loudly. The cashier, a teenager with braces and a name tag that said, "Tyler, happy to help," had tried to make conversation, something about the weather or the local team winning. I'd managed what I hoped was a smile, but probably looked more like a grimace, paid with crumpled bills from my jacket pocket, and declined the offer to donate $1 to whatever charity they were promoting this week. Not because I didn't care, but because caring took energy I didn't have. It was raining, one of those soft, gentle rains that makes the pavement glisten like spilled stars. The streetlights caught each droplet, turning the whole neighborhood into something from a movie I'd probably never have anyone to watch with. I'd forgotten my reusable bags again, so everything was crammed into one of those brown paper sacks that the store grudgingly provides, the kind with the handles that cut into your fingers and make you question every life choice that led to this moment. I was 3 houses from home, shifting the bag to my other hand for the 5th time, when karma decided to visit. The bottom of that paper bag gave out with a soggy surrender right at the curb where the Johnsons used to live. Everything clattered into a puddle with a splash that seemed to echo down the empty street. Bananas that would definitely be bruised now, a loaf of bread that immediately started soaking up water like a sponge, and a jar of pickles that rolled like it had somewhere better to be, clicking against the asphalt with each rotation. I just stood there for a moment, rain pattering on my shoulders, watching my sad little dinner scatter across the wet pavement. It felt like such a perfect metaphor for my life that I almost laughed. Almost. Before I could even properly curse my luck or decide whether to salvage the groceries or just leave them as an offering to the rain gods, she appeared. The front door of the house opened, spilling warm yellow light onto the porch. She emerged with an umbrella already blooming open above her head, one of those cheerful polka-dotted ones that belonged in a children's book. Behind her, framed in the doorway, sat an orange tabby cat, watching the proceedings with the kind of intense interest cats reserve for potential drama. "Oh no, hold on, I'm coming," she called out, her voice carrying a warmth that cut through the cold drizzle. She had this way of moving, not rushing exactly, but purposeful, like someone who'd made helping others into an art form. Her rain boots, bright red with white daisies, splashed through puddles without hesitation. She wore an oversized cardigan that looked hand-knit, the kind with pockets deep enough to hide secrets or snacks, probably both. Without saying much else, she crouched down beside me and started gathering my runaway groceries like it was a team rescue mission we'd rehearsed. She had this warm smile, the kind that made you feel like she was really, truly happy to have found you there in the rain, groceries scattered like confetti at the world's saddest party. "The bread's a lost cause, I'm afraid," she said, holding up the sodden loaf with a rueful grin. "But I've got a fresh one inside that's looking for a home. Just came out of the bread maker an hour ago." She rescued the bananas with a gentle touch, inspecting them like they were precious cargo. The pickle jar had rolled to a stop against the curb, and she retrieved it with a little triumphant "aha" that made me smile despite myself. It was the first genuine smile I'd managed in days. "You look like you could use some tea," she said after we'd collected everything salvageable. She said it like it was a medical diagnosis with the kind of certainty that brooked no argument. Now, normally, I'm not the walk into a stranger's house type. I'd been raised on a steady diet of stranger danger and keeping to yourself. But there was something so safe about that moment. The glow from her porch light spilling onto the wet street like a welcome mat made of light. The smell of cinnamon and something else, maybe nutmeg, drifting out her front door. The cat had ventured onto the porch now, winding around my ankles like we'd known each other for years, leaving little wet paw prints on my jeans. "I'm Margaret," she said, shifting my damp groceries to one arm so she could offer her hand. "Maggie, really. Just moved in last month, and this demanding gentleman is Sir Reginald, but he answers to Reggie when he feels like it." I shook her hand. It was warm and soft, with calluses that suggested she did more than just bake bread. "I'm James," I managed, feeling oddly formal and underdressed for the moment simultaneously. "Well, James," she said, already heading toward her front door, "you can stand out here in the rain looking like a lost duckling, or you can come in for tea and help me eat these cookies before I end up eating them all myself and regretting it. Your choice, but Reggie votes for option 2. The cat meowed as if to confirm this, then padded inside, his tail held high like a tour guide's flag. I said yes. Looking back, I think it was the easiest yes I'd ever said. Inside, it was like stepping into a little pocket of summer that had decided to wait out winter indoors. The living room glowed with those fairy lights I'd noticed from the street, strung along the windows and bookshelves in constellation patterns. Soft jazz played from somewhere in the back, the kind with a walking bass line that made you want to sway. A kettle was already starting its build-up to a whistle, as if she'd put it on before coming outside, expecting company. The walls were covered in photographs, but not the formal kind. These were moments caught mid-laugh, blurry dogs, sunsets that weren't quite centered. Real life, not the curated version. A piano sat in the corner, sheet music open to something by Chopin, pencil marks in the margins suggesting someone who played for joy, not perfection. Her kitchen was everything mine wasn't. Where I had empty counters and a microwave that saw too much use, she had mason jars filled with spices, each one labeled in careful handwriting. A sourdough starter bubbled contentedly in a jar marked Stanley. She'd named her sourdough starter. The counter was lined with cookies cooling on a wire rack, chocolate chip from the look of them, still soft enough that the chocolate gleamed. "Stress baking," she explained, pulling out a chair at her kitchen table for me. "Moved here for a fresh start after life demanded one. Turns out the best way to meet neighbors is to make sure your house smells like a bakery." She moved around the kitchen with the easy grace of someone who'd made peace with their space. 2 mugs appeared. Proper mugs, not the corporate logo ones I had at home, but handmade pottery that fit perfectly in your palms. One had a small chip on the handle that had been painted over with gold, like that Japanese art of kintsugi, where you celebrate the cracks instead of hiding them. The kettle chose that moment to announce itself with a shriek that made us both jump. Maggie laughed, rushing over to rescue it. Every single time, you'd think after a month I'd remember it's louder than a freight train. She managed to knock the honey jar with her elbow in her haste, and we both watched it roll toward the edge of the counter in slow motion. I caught it just before it tumbled, and she grinned. "Teamwork already. I like it." She poured the tea with ceremony, chamomile that smelled like summer fields and better days. "Found these at an estate sale," she said, noticing me admiring the mug. The lady running it said they belonged to a potter in Asheville who believed every mug should fit its owner. Took me 20 minutes to find the one that felt right, worth every second. The cookies appeared on a plate painted with sunflowers, still warm enough that the chocolate stretched when you broke them. She slid them my way and just asked about my day like it mattered. Not the polite "how are you" that expects fine as an answer, but a real question, with space after it for a real answer. "So, James," she said, wrapping her hands around her own mug, "what has the universe been throwing at you lately? Besides grocery bags with trust issues, I mean." And the strange thing was, I told her, this woman I'd known for all of 10 minutes, and I found myself telling her about the job that was slowly grinding me down, about the phone calls from home I'd been avoiding, about how I'd been in Burlington for 2 years, but still felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I told her about the morning meetings where everyone talked but nobody said anything, about the lunch hours I spent sitting in my car in the parking garage, eating the same turkey sandwich while listening to podcasts about other people living interesting lives, about the weekends that stretched out like blank pages I didn't know how to fill, so I filled them with work instead, because at least spreadsheets didn't ask why I hadn't called lately. My mom calls every Sunday, I heard myself admitting, surprising myself with the honesty. Always at 2 o'clock. I can set my watch by it, and I let it go to voicemail every time because I don't know how to tell her that her son, the one she bragged about to all her church friends, the one who got the good job and moved to the city, I don't know how to tell her I'm drowning in all this success. She listened the way so few people do anymore, not waiting for her turn to talk, not checking her phone, not offering solutions I hadn't asked for. She just listened, occasionally making these small sounds of understanding, refilling my tea when it got low, pushing another cookie my way when I paused too long. When my voice cracked a little on the word drowning, she didn't pretend not to notice, but she didn't make a big deal of it either. Just slid the tissue box a little closer and kept listening. "You know what I think?" she said finally, after I'd run out of words and we sat in the comfortable silence that followed. "I think sometimes we get so good at being alone that we forget it's supposed to be a choice, not a default. When I moved here, I promised myself I'd choose differently." She stood and moved to the window, adjusting one of the fairy light strands that had drooped a little. The rain had picked up again, tapping against the glass like tiny fingers asking to come in. "Lost my husband 2 years ago," she said quietly, her back still to me. "Charlie. 43 years we had together, raised 2 kids, traveled to 17 countries, argued about whether toilet paper should hang over or under for 4 decades. She turned back with a soft smile. "Over, by the way. It should definitely hang over." She returned to her seat, wrapping her hands around her mug like she was holding something precious. "After he died, I rattled around our old house like a marble in a coffee can. Everything echoed. The kids tried. They'd visit, bring the grandkids, fill the space with noise. But then they'd leave, and the quiet would rush back in like water finding its level." Reggie jumped into her lap as if he knew she needed him right then, settling into a purring loaf. She stroked his fur absently, her wedding ring catching the light. Still there, still worn, still part of her story. "I know what you're thinking," she said, noticing my glance at the ring. "Why keep wearing it? Charlie used to say this ring wasn't just about being married, it was about choosing to love every single day. Still true, just different now." After a moment, Reggie hopped down with the kind of confidence that suggested he owned the place, padded over to me and head-butted my hand until I scratched behind his ears, purring like a small motor. "He likes you," Maggie observed. "He's an excellent judge of character, hated the cable guy last week. Turns out the man was trying to charge me for premium channels I didn't order." We talked until the rain stopped. Actually, we only realized it stopped when I noticed the sound had gone quiet outside, replaced by the drip, drip, drip of water from the gutters. Time had done that strange thing it does when you're exactly where you're supposed to be, stretched and compressed simultaneously, until I couldn't tell if I'd been there for minutes or hours. At some point, she'd shown me the rest of her house, each room telling its own story. The spare bedroom she'd turned into an art studio, canvases leaning against the walls, paintings of ordinary moments made extraordinary. A coffee cup catching morning light, hands holding hands, Reggie looking regal despite the paint smudge on his whiskers. The bathroom with motivational quotes written on the mirror in dry erase marker changed weekly. "This week's theme is hope," she'd explained. "Last week was courage. The week before that was just cookie recipes because sometimes that's what you need." She showed me the notebook where she kept track of neighborhood happenings, not in a nosy way, but in a caring way. "Mrs. Patterson's grandson visits on Tuesdays. The young's baby has colic. They're up most nights. David from 2 blocks over just started chemo." Each entry had notes, took soup, babysat for 2 hours, mowed lawn without asking. "How do you know all this?" I'd asked, genuinely amazed. "You'd be surprised what people tell you when you give them cookies and actually listen," she'd replied. She stood when I finally made moves to leave, disappearing into the kitchen and returning with supplies. My salvaged groceries were tucked neatly into one of those canvas totes that said, "Be kind," in faded letters, the kind you get from farmers markets and never remember to bring back. But that wasn't all. She'd added the promised loaf of fresh bread, still warm, wrapped in a clean tea towel, a mason jar of what looked like homemade jam, and the rest of the cookies bundled in parchment paper and tied with kitchen twine. "House rules," she said firmly when I tried to protest. "Anyone who shows up looking like the world's been using them as a soccer ball goes home with provisions. Non-negotiable." At the door, she handed me an umbrella, not the polka-dotted one, but a sensible black one. "For next time," she said. Though hopefully next time involves less puddle groceries and more planned visits. When I left, she called after me, "You have a place here anytime." She said it like she meant it, like it wasn't just one of those polite things people say, like my showing up wouldn't be an inconvenience or an intrusion, but something she'd actually welcome. That was 3 years ago. Maggie's house has become my Thursday night tradition. Sometimes it's just tea and whatever she's stress-baked that week. Sometimes it's helping her figure out why her printer has decided to communicate only in hieroglyphics. Sometimes it's sitting on her porch, watching Reggie judge the neighbors while she points out the constellations her fairy lights accidentally mirror. She taught me to make bread, real bread, the kind that requires patience and faith that yeast will do what yeast does. My sourdough starter lives on my counter now, in a jar labeled Stanley Jr., because she insisted Stanley needed a friend. My kitchen smells like rising dough most weekends, and I've started keeping extra mugs for visitors. Last month, I watched from my window as she appeared on the porch of the young couple who'd just moved in across the street, the ones with the colicky baby and the exhausted eyes. She had a casserole in one hand and that same polka-dotted umbrella in the other, even though it wasn't raining. An hour later, I saw her teaching them her secret baby-soothing technique, which mostly involved Reggie and a very specific way of humming. She's the reason I now keep tea in my cupboard. Proper tea, not the forgotten box of Lipton from 2019. She's why I have cookies in a jar on my counter, always, just in case a neighbor's night needs a little warmth. She's why I learned the names of everyone on our street, why I water the Hendersons' plants when they travel, why I shovel Mrs. Chen's walkway without being asked. Last week, I found someone's groceries scattered in front of my house. A stressed-looking college kid staring at his betrayed backpack like the world had personally offended him. I helped him gather everything, invited him in for tea, sent him home with leftover soup and the good Tupperware, the kind you'd be sad to lose. "You have a place here anytime," I told him as he left, and I meant it the way Maggie had meant it. That Sunday, when my phone rang at 2 o'clock, I answered it. "Hi, Mom," I said, and for the first time in months, I told her about my life, the real one, with Thursday teas and sourdough starters and neighbors who'd become family. Her voice went soft when I finished. "Sounds like you found your people, honey. That's what home is." She doesn't know it, but she taught me something that day, that kindness doesn't have to be grand or loud to change a life. Sometimes it's just an umbrella in the rain, a plate of cookies, or 3 words that make the world feel smaller, warmer, more manageable. Sometimes it's just opening your door and meaning it when you say, "You're welcome here." The thing about kindness is that it multiplies. It spreads like fairy lights in a dark window, like the smell of baking bread, like the sound of rain stopping just when you realize you are exactly where you belong. Maggie started a ripple that night, something that touched lives she'll never even know about. All because one rainy evening, a woman with a polka-dotted umbrella decided that kindness could be as simple as saying yes. Yes to the mess, yes to the stranger, yes to the possibility that we're all just walking each other home, and meaning it.